Hello guys, I hope wherever you're watching us from, you are having a great time. This is AfriPost and welcome to today's video. Now, many times we've always been told that Africa needs help and this help can only be gotten from European countries. You've seen many events where European countries are coming to Africa and trying to give us solutions to problems that they think are affecting us. And in other instances, we've also seen European countries trying to limit entry of Africans in their countries. And this is something that has been talked about in wider contexts. I want us to discuss this issue at a greater length, but before we do it, let's listen to one Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, who is a Nigerian economist and also a former minister of solid minerals in Nigeria. She was speaking about the fact that Europe needs Africa and that Europe cannot go ahead eliminating Africa and trying to think that African citizens are third-grade human beings. Let's watch and then react to it at the end.
When you have a topic that says Bold Europe, it definitely suggests that more people are realizing how not so bold Europe is today. And there is nothing more helpful to the human spirit than ownership of a problem, because you cannot solve a problem you deny. And so the fact that Europe is alongside its young people confronting the reality that there was once a Europe that could hold its head up and say we are bold, although definition of that bold from the perspective of an African would be nuanced. But it still is a good thing that we're having this topic. And so my number one point about bold Europe would be that it has to be a Europe that is self-reflective of history. Europe's neighbor, proximate neighbor, as a continent, is my continent. It's Africa. A bold Europe would be a Europe that agrees that Africa cannot willy-nilly just go with Europe on every issue Europe wants, simply because Europe once upon a time straddled Africa, colonizing many of the countries, being exploitative and extractive of that region of the world. What Europe that wants to act boldly would do in 21st century world is to recognize that there is a new generation of Europeans who actually look back at that history and think it was not a good history, and yet are very bold to build person-to-person, business-to-business relationship with Africa on the basis of partnership. The bureaucrats with the old and dated mindset of Africa need to retire so that this younger generation that understand that it is about the accumulation of ideas and the diversity of those ideas that will take us into a prosperous future that is equitable. Number two is that a bold Europe would be a Europe that stops looking at Africa as a humanitarian case. It would be a bold Europe would be a Europe that looks at Africa and sees the possibility of a contiguous zone of prosperity and stability. Not a Europe that makes immigration the heart and mind of its relationship with Africa. It would be a Europe. A bold Europe would be a Europe that sees Africa as a business case. A Europe that does not ask me as an African, what do you think about the Chinese? Why? You are Africa's proximate neighbor, and you're worried about a country that's how many nautical miles away from your neighbor. You have to be asking yourself, what did we get wrong? That's what a bold Europe would do. A bold Europe would stop being hypocritical. And what do I mean by this? Europe took a position around the issue of climate change and the various options of energy generation for the world. And suddenly something went off. And a redefinition of what energy security would mean in terms of sources of energy mix happened. So suddenly, gas has become an important part of the equation. Even coal has become an important part of the equation. And it actually confidently, in a wrong way, goes across Africa, picking up prospects of these resources, whereas your proximate neighbor has just 35% of its people with access to energy. It made it difficult for these countries to have access to the capital that could develop their diverse sources of energy. And suddenly, because Europe's own energy security is threatened, it goes back on its word. A bold Europe would be a Europe that the word that I take that back. What it says is, what you're doing is so loud, I cannot hear what you're saying. Europe has to work back on this. Because the truth is, Europe needs Africa. A bold Europe would look at the demographics and what the demographics are saying to us in terms of the labor force of the world. Our continent, Africa, is going to be 1 out of every 3 young people in the workforce of the world by 2030 are going to be coming from that continent. You called me to come. I believe you called me as a friend. And friends tell the truth. They don't do diplomacy. They are very direct. So, our continent is a continent that Europe today, with the present mindset, would miss out on. And I say it with every boldness. Europe did not see China coming 40 years ago. They didn't see it coming. You also are not seeing that there are 3 game changers that would make Africa become. These 3 game changers are Africa's young people, Africa's women, and technology. A Europe that is not seeing Africa the way it should see Africa is missing out on the business case that is Africa that could help Europe regain its competitiveness in the world. Europe's problem, it has macroeconomic stability issues, but the real issue for Europe is its competitiveness. And we saw what happened with COVID. How could the entire world collaborate to build one production center for all of us? That was disastrous. A bold Europe would look at that story and would use the data that show that Africa can be that place of diversification of the opportunities for structural competitiveness of Europe and not anything beyond seeing the continent as a continent that it appeases by doing little pieces of development assistance.
I think from that clip, you're able to see that Africa is a place that is full of a lot of potential. And one thing that happens is that many of African leaders are the ones who are always failing the continent, because Africa has a lot of natural resources that, if well harnessed, can really be used to develop the continent to a greater height. Another aspect is the fact that European countries have taken advantage of our continent and tried to impose their solutions to our problems. They've also come to Africa and thought of it as a place where they can take advantage of our citizens and take our natural resources, go and develop them and use them for their own enrichment. And this is the thing that Dr. Exposes is talking about here. And she's really exposing the West for who they are and telling them that if they think that Europe will be existent without Africa, then that is a lie that they are living on. Because let's ask ourselves some questions here. A country like France, which is a major European member, is always benefiting from Africa. A lot of natural resources are drawn from Africa and taken to France without Africans' own consent. Another thing here is much of the former colonies of France are always depositing and still paying the colonial tax that they made an agreement with our founding fathers. So this is a very serious issue that I think she did a great job there, telling off the West about how they perceive Africa and what they think they can do without Africa. I can tell you most of the precious resources are obtained in the continent, and what they can do is only come to the continent and beg us or even steal from us, as they have always done. But trying to think that in the future there will be something, that is a total lie. You remember that currently we have China, we also have Russia, that have really upped their game in courting Africa and courting African head of states to make sure that they can also be members of this continent. Because if you look at it, Africa has much of the things that will be needed in future. The natural resources are here and they are not depleting, regardless of the fact that for many years they have been plundered by the West. They still are there because this is a blessed continent. We also see that Africa also has the youngest population. If you look at the median age, it is the youthful population that is high in Africa. Compare this with most of the Western nations. They have destroyed their populations, they have destroyed their demographics, and they are having many old people remaining to be alive. So I think Africa will really be very important when it comes to market, because as a population we continue growing. Africa will also be very, very important when it comes to free labor and cheap labor for that matter, because with many youthful population, I think you have a very large group of people that can work cheaply. Africa is also very important when it comes to obtaining natural resources that are needed. Gold, diamond, call it cobalt, coltan, all those important minerals are here in Africa. Uranium for that matter. So we think Africa is the future, and Europeans cannot come and boast for us, telling us that they are important and Africa is not as important as it should be. I don't know what to think about this topic. Please, if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Please remember to also give us your comment down in the comment section so that we also understand your perspective about the topic. Thank you. May the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.